Welcome back everybody, thanks for tuning in. This video is going to be something a little bit different, but it's something that I think a lot of you will like, so let's try something unusual today. Many years ago, when I was still in grad school, I had a lot more time on my hands than I had anticipated that I would. And one of the things that I got into to spend some of that time was doing paranormal research. Like so many children of the 80s, I grew up loving the Ghostbusters. I played role-playing games since I was young. I spent most of my lunch hours in high school hiding in the library, reading those Time Life books, that encyclopedia series they had on the paranormal. When I discovered that one of the leading ghost hunting organizations in the country was located about 10 minutes from my house, I couldn't help but decide to join and give it a shot. The expectations and the reality of that were very different. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about today. I want to give kind of a counterpoint to some of the silliness that people see in the popular media portrayal today. I was part of this ghost hunting organization for about 2 years. For some of that time, I was the research director of the organization. There's a big ghost hunter conference down in Alton, Illinois every year, and I have been a speaker at that event. If you've ever watched any of those ghost hunting stories and TV shows on things like the Learning Channel or History Channel or Discovery back in the, right in the year 2000-ish, you've probably seen footage that came from me and my organization. Matter of fact, probably of all the footage that you've seen in those shows, about 20 to 25% of the footage you've seen is probably from my organization. At one point I had been a guest on the Art Bell Show, and I had been offered a job teaching parapsychology at witchschool.com, which I flatly turned down. Now, I'm not claiming to be Hans Holzer, but I do have a background, and I'm going to speak from some position of insight and knowledge and authority. After all of that, I am afraid that I have to conclude that there is nothing scientific about ghost hunting. Some go so far as to call it paranormal research, though there is no real research going on. It is a community of folklore enthusiasts, it is a hobby, it is a cottage industry, and it's a form of adventure tourism. It's really a shame because there are some fields of scientific inquiry where hobbyist scientists and citizen scientists have made some very serious contributions to the academic field, particularly fields like entomology, astronomy, and computer sciences. These are all sciences where hobbyist scientists have done really wonderful things and have produced very good data that have contributed quite a bit. I think at one point paranormal research could have been a field that, if taken seriously, could have been a place where citizen scientists could really have shined in producing some data and research that other professional scientists would have been less willing to invest time and effort into. Unfortunately, that's not really how it is. Before I get into anything too deep, let me take some time to outline for you what a real investigation of a quote-unquote haunted house looks like. I'm sure you've seen plenty of television shows that have investigations being done and those, being produced, and I'd like to give you a much better sense of what it really looks like. The average ghost hunt begins with 1 to 3 hours of driving to the location. Typically, the head of the investigation will interview the residents of the home, and this information will not be shared with the rest of the research team. If nothing else, this was probably the only research protocol that even vaguely resembles science that I've seen in the investigation of haunted houses. What happens next is setting up wires and cameras and monitors, and running these wires and taping them down and everything else can take 2 to 3 hours pretty easily. We would then spend the next 10 to 12 hours sitting in the command center with all of the monitors, bored out of our skulls watching 6 to 7 TV screens with absolutely nothing going on, hour after hour after hour. Then it would be time to pack up, roll up all the cords and cables and put away all the cameras and TV screens, get back in the car, and drive home for another hour to 3 hours. If we were really lucky, once or twice during that investigation, we might catch something that looked a little bit weird for a second on one of the monitors. Over the next couple of weeks, we would spend 30, 40, 50 hours hanging out and rewatching those tapes over and over again to see if there's anything we missed. And typically, there was very little. Anything exciting that ever happened was always the result of electrical, plumbing, or structural problems with the home. I've had a couple electrical shocks in my experience, but never scared by a ghost. If you've ever watched the TV shows, what I just described probably doesn't sound all that familiar, because the fact of the matter is that ghost hunting is very boring. Very boring doesn't make for good television. Television producers that popularized this kind of thing were, of course, in the television industry. They're motivated to make profit. And they make profit by producing television shows that are engaging. And trust me, a lot of guys sitting around staring at TV monitors for 10-12 hours is not engaging. Much like other reality TV shows, paranormal investigations are highly overproduced and dramatic elements are artificially introduced. Nobody I know has ever seen anything that induced a panic or to have them flee the home. I am somewhat proud to say that my group never engaged in that kind of conduct. Though we did offer and provide footage to lots of media outlets, we never got involved in that type of reality TV type of production. I guess then that this might be a good time to talk about what kinds of things we did find. In all my time doing that work, I did have 3 somewhat interesting encounters. I'm going to make those into separate videos. They're only going to be short, and trust me, they're not nearly as exciting as you may think. When I say vaguely interesting, I mean just that, vaguely interesting. What we did encounter with some degree of frequency was the phenomena that we call orbs. I'm sure that anyone who has spent any time watching these television shows knows exactly what it is that an orb looks like. They're these little floaty, glowy balls that we see on infrared cameras or on night shot cameras. And trust me, I've spent a lot of time looking at video footage of these orbs. Unfortunately, I can explain away almost all of them from 2 different very natural sources. Quite frankly, most of them are bugs. There are certain bugs that these night shot cameras with these illuminator systems light up and that make those kind of eerie looking floaty little glowy balls. In reality, those are just bugs being illuminated by the illuminator of the camera. Occasionally, you'll also get something called a near lens object. Basically, these are little bits of dust or whatever that are floating right in front of the lens of the camera, and because they're so close to the lens, they look a little bigger than they are. But trust me, they're dust. I must be fair and say that on 2 to 3 occasions I did experience something that looked like an orb that I'm fairly certain wasn't one of these 2 things. On at least one occasion, we saw an orb pass right through a sheet of cellophane that we had set up as a barrier, and we witnessed this happen on 2 separate cameras at weird angles to each other at 90-degree angles. So this rules out that it wasn't a near lens event because we got it on 2 different cameras, and when we examined the cellophane before and after installation, there were no perforations in it. So that was interesting. Just because we can't easily identify it as a bug or a near lens object certainly doesn't mean it's a ghost. And the next step of assuming that a ghost is the still lingering spirit of a dead human being is a hell of a leap of logic. So no, that's not what I'm implying. I'm implying I saw something interesting that I can't exactly explain. This is where paranormal research becomes so incredibly complicated. Assuming that my observation was correct and that we do have an example of this thing passing through a sheet of cellophane without leaving any kind of a tear or mark or anything like that, and we can rule out that it wasn't a near lens object because it was on multiple cameras at once, there are still a lot of ruling out that we'd have to do to start to find out what we're really talking about here. That's what science requires, replication in a lab-type environment, and that's something we don't seem to be able to do in Parapsych. Repeatability is very important, and this is something that I saw once in 2 years of trying. In order for this to be real science, we would have to do series after series of ruling out types of experiments to essentially see what this thing is based on what it isn't. And that requires the ability to recreate or to re-experience this phenomena or this event or this occurrence. And we don't seem to be able to make that happen. So why are people doing this at all? Well, for a lot of the people involved, they do it because they enjoy it. It's a hobby, it's a pastime, it's interesting. There are a lot of people in the community that really enjoy the history and the folklore, and they like to go to these places where these stories are. I suspect that people go to places like Bachelor's Grove for the same reason that they go to places like Mount Rushmore or the Grand Canyon. And being involved in paranormal research gives us an opportunity to do that. It's fun to spend time with people who share similar interests to you, and ultimately I think that's what ghost hunting is. Now, for other people, there's a business side to it as well. More than one person that I know has written books on the subject. Books about hauntings and paranormal experiences sell. Now, to be fair, a lot of these guys that I know have day jobs too. One guy in particular that I know, a very well-known and very well-respected ghost researcher by the way, is in fact a forklift driver. Mind you, he has about 30 books published at the moment. They don't bring in a lot of income, but they bring in some. And for people like him, this is as much of a cottage industry and a way to make side money as it is a hobby. He also makes a fairly decent chunk of money doing ghost tours. Come Halloween season, he rents a bus and takes people to the haunted places around the area. And I'm not adding this as any type of criticism. I think it's wonderful that people can make a living, or at least make some money, doing something and engaging in something that they really enjoy and they find themselves passionate about. You know, more power to them. I'm glad they do like it. In fact, I think that our American ghost story folklore is a valuable cultural asset worth preserving, even if it's scientific poppycock. At least it has some kind of cultural value. These are some of the stories that helped identify who we are as a culture. Though, let me talk for a minute about some of the negative characteristics of some of the people that I have worked with in this field. Some are outright media whores who will pretty much say anything to get their 15 minutes of fame. A lot of the people in the field are not particularly successful, and they're not particularly well educated either. Don't get me wrong, that's not everybody. One of the guys that I worked with was a brilliant engineer who was retired from IBM, was looking for something to do in his spare time. Another guy was a retired Navy intelligence officer. Again, brilliant guy. And some of the others not so much. There are some other people in the field who are, quite frankly, mentally ill. They're the kind of people that believe all kinds of craziness. They believe that they're psychic, or that spirits talk to them, or that they have a calling from God to liberate the souls that are lost here on Earth. You know, there are legitimately people in this field who have those types of thoughts and feelings, and quite frankly, not good science. That's an understatement, obviously. I think there are plenty of people who get a ego or self-esteem boost for being involved in something like that. I know I did. Being a ghost hunter is a fantastic topic of conversation at parties. Most of these aren't particularly bad. I just think it's important to really be honest and insightful about what it is that's really going on. As negative as I may sound in this video, and as critical as I may be, the fact of the matter is an experience that I really liked. If I were to live my life again, I'd do it again. I might do it a little bit different, but overall, I think it was a positive experience, just in different ways than most people might expect. Though, I do want to talk for a second about ghost hunting gear, mainly because I find it an interesting psychological phenomena. Some of the pieces of gear that we used were absolutely vital. In the investigations that I took part in, the cameras were more important than we were. We didn't use cameras so much as we were there to set up and take down the cameras. The cameras were really the important part of the investigation. We were just their crew. As for some of the other handheld gizmos that you see, things like EMF detectors, negative ion detectors, Geiger counters, infrared thermometers. Let me be 100% honest with you. Nobody playing with those things has the slightest clue what they're really doing. We walk around with them, looking at them, pretending like we know what we're doing, and all we're really looking for is if the reading does anything weird. And if the reading doesn't do anything weird, you know what that means? We don't have a clue. There are some people that theorize that quote-unquote ghosts create cold spots, and by using an infrared thermometer, we can narrow down to where ghosts are more likely to be seen by finding the cold spots in the house. I can't say that I've ever seen any evidence that supports that theory, but at least we know some rationale behind that. So when you see a ghost hunter with an infrared thermometer, at least they're being somewhat earnest in what they're doing. EMF meters, electromagnetic field detectors, many people in ghost research believe are somehow connected to ghost activity, but quite frankly there aren't any real solid theories as to why or how. They're merely walking around looking for a spot that might have a slightly different reading than everything else. Anybody that knows anything about electromagnetic fields realizes that inside of a modern house, there are lots of things that affect the electromagnetic field. Wiring, microwaves, televisions, God knows what else. So finding an unusual spot of EMF in a home really means just about nothing. As far as radiation detectors and negative ion detectors, I have no idea. I hope that we're waiting for or looking for a eureka moment where we do get some kind of a strange reading, and later on we find something interesting that happens in that spot. We don't know what we're doing with this equipment so much as I think we're hoping to learn what we're doing with this equipment. We're hoping to find a correlation or something that we can pin together with readings, but as it is now, people who are looking at those things, they can't tell anything based on them. By and large, they're nothing but props in ghost hunting theater. Is there any hope for real scientific research or earnest investigation into the paranormal? I really don't think so. Ghost research is shunned by the scientific community, and as we all know, in science, peer review is very important. Legitimate scientists don't want anything to do with ghost hunting because it will sully their reputation. They won't be taken seriously anymore, and for good reason. I'm only comfortable talking about this because I'm pretty anonymous under this name. And then again, I'm a clinician, not a researcher, so I don't have to worry about it too much. A lot of us clinicians are weird. Now, also a lot of the people who have a very strong foothold in the field as it already exists are not in the field because of any real interest to do actual scientific research. They're there because they have that cottage industry that they're promoting. It's their hobby and their folklore, and they like what they're doing the way they're doing it now. And they don't want the rigors of scientific methodology. They want to go to neat, interesting places and see the cool sights. They want to go see the Lump Mansion or the Bell Witch Cave or Bachelor's Grove. They want to go to these places once as an experience and as a vacation or as a tourist. They don't want to keep going to those sites day after day after day after day to do the same experiment time after time after time. That's not what they're there for. Many of them are also seeking the social status that comes with being engaged in something interesting. When my one associate goes to work every day, he's a forklift driver. But when he gets interviewed by the press as a ghost research expert, that's a whole different thing. That's something that he won't experience in his regular life. That is very exciting, very appealing. It produces the affirmation and attention that so many of us crave. I have several friends who are real scientists in the hard sciences doing real research, and none of them get on television, I can guarantee you that. Even if they do something miraculous like cure cancer, they're on a team of about 10,000 other scientists. They're not all going to get to write a book. Real science isn't that sexy. So, all in all, I guess we're going to come down to my conclusion. Ghost research is not, and probably never will be, science. It is not, and probably never will be, real research either. It is entertaining. It is interesting. It can even be fun. If you're willing to let bygones be bygones, and let yourself get past the idea that many of the people involved are pretty much wrong about everything. If you can just enjoy the folklore as folklore, and the stories as stories, and just let yourself indulge in the spooky fun, it can be worthwhile. Just try not to take yourself too seriously. Alright everybody, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Have a good one.